Welcome to the next episode in Important Questions in K-12 STEM Education with me, Todd Hutner. A little bit about me, that's a picture of my first year teaching. And as you can see, I still have a love for a nice tie. So always excited to be here. Joining us today is also Jill Gregory. She's our moderator. Today's important question is, how are we going to make sure they, and by they I mean the students, pass the end of year test? So this time of year after spring break, it's time to start really focusing on that test. So how are we going to start to make sure they pass the end of the year test? And I thought it'd be interesting to just look through a few milestones in high-stakes standardized testing here in the U.S. What I think is really interesting is in 1926, the SAT is first administered, and then in 1938, the first SAT prep course is offered. So we can see over 90 years ago now, there's still this desire to prepare students for success on these standardized tests. In the 1980s, you get the Nation at Risk report, which really hypercharged the role of standardized testing for everyone. So at first, the SAT, the ACT, AP tests were for select students, and then with Nation at Risk, No Child Left Behind, and Every Student Succeeds Act, now we're testing students throughout the K-12 years. And so that has led to scope and sequence documents that look like this. I want to call your attention to the Flex Day recommendations that has 8 Flex Days. This is an actual scope and sequence from a large district here in the US. I'm not going to name them. If you look at the teacher tips, it says consider using Flex Days to do SBA. That's a state standardized test. And so in response, it makes sense. You're going to get states making their own preparation document. So this is not the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program test. This is actually a practice test. So the state of Maryland is trying to support teachers by giving students and support students by giving more tests. And then, of course, that leads to private opportunities to monetize test preparation. So here in Texas, we take the STAR, which is the State of Texas Assessment of Academic Readiness. And so this group has test preparation guides for people to purchase. So I think clearly test preparation is a big business. We set aside 8 Flex Days at the end of the year. That's almost 2 full weeks. But is it helpful? And I'm not sure that those are completely helpful in and of themselves. And so the question is, how can we make sure students pass the end of the year tests? I think the first thing as a caveat is high quality learning experiences throughout the year. So test preparation is really supposed to be, the test itself is supposed to be a measure of learning. And when good teaching and high quality learning experiences are occurring from August or September into the spring semester, we are likely to have students that score higher on those tests. So then maybe a better way to answer this, especially at this time of year, is what makes helpful test review? And I think that there's 4 features of helpful test review. And those 4 features are going to be asking for answers and reasons, a way to make student thinking visible, questions about real and interesting phenomenon, and providing students with feedback to support learning. So the first thing, asking for answers and reasons. I think this is particularly important on review questions where students get to select from a set of options like multiple choice, or if you're asking students to categorize things. So which of these shapes is acute and obtuse, for example, in a math context, or which of these are plants and which of them are animals. We want to ask for reasons. And so here's an example from that Maryland, from the Texas, this is a Texas released STAR question. And what would we know if the student puts A for 1 and J for question 2? To some extent, all we really know is that they, for whatever reason, put A for 1. We don't know if they got A and they just rolled a 4-sided die. Maybe they flipped a coin a couple times, or they guessed, or they had some reason. Similarly, if a student puts J, we don't know why they put J. Maybe they meant H, but accidentally circled J. So those things happen. And so we're limited in the inferences we can make about what students do and don't know. And that's going to be important as we move forward in the other things we want to do. First, we need to know what students know when they're when we're preparing them or reviewing for a test, so that we can assist them if their thinking is incorrect. So here's another approach. This is a computer-based assessment system that has students select an answer. So here's a question that asks about magnets. And then the second part is, why did you select that answer? So students need to write in the space below why they selected that answer. And then when you aggregate this question across all of the possible answers, you can see potential trends. You can also see, why are students who say starting position B, what are they thinking? And this gets you some important information for correcting potential misunderstandings or misconceptions. I think it's also important asking students for reasons why they chose an answer provides more information about what they know than just asking for that answer. Another thing that we want to do is a way to make student thinking visible. And we want to do that in ways that support students drawing on multiple ideas, concepts, practices from a discipline, be it math, science, social studies even. So one thing is to have students update a model when they add a new variable. So what would happen if foxes who eat mice and birds were introduced to this ecosystem? That's going to tell you, however the student answers, is going to tell you a lot more about students' knowledge of predator-prey relationship, of ecosystems, of food webs, than just asking a question, which of these is a primary consumer? We're not asking students necessarily to make the model, particularly when we're reviewing for a test. We might want to use that time to review other concepts. But to answer this question, we need to have a big understanding of what is a food web, what are producers, consumers, predator, prey, and how does the availability of food at one level impact what happens at other levels in the ecosystem. Another example I like to do is ask students to classify an edge case. So are platypus a mammal? Is a platypus a mammal? Is a nice edge case. We generally use rules of thumb, such as if it has live birth, but the platypus lays eggs. And so this one is tough to classify, but it's going to help you understand what indicators students look for when they're determining if something, say, is a mammal versus an amphibian versus a bird. And so those edge cases really can pull out important information for students. In mathematics, I think an edge case is, what is the difference between a p-value of 0.049 and 0.051? And on the surface, the answer is just 0.002, and yes, that is correct. But what does it mean statistically? So to answer this question, students have to have appreciation of what the p-value is telling us, which is the odds of getting the result or more extreme result we got in a sample, assuming the null hypothesis is actually true. And so really that difference tells us that there is a 2 in 1,000 chance difference between a p-value of 0.049 and 0.051 in getting extreme values that we got in this z-test. That again is going to pull out a whole lot of information about what students know and how they know it and how they think about things. A third helpful approach to preparing for tests is questions about real and interesting phenomena. I think this goes well with having students explain phenomenon. It goes well with making their thinking visible. So here's an example of a scientific phenomenon. Why would the reintroduction of wolves to the Yellowstone ecosystem have an impact on the health of the streams? Students can read this read this news article or watch a similar video about it, while also having to explain once again the role of different parts of the ecosystem in maintaining the whole health of the ecosystem. In mathematics, I think this is a really nice example. So using the intermediate value theorem proved that at some point between Thursday at 1 p.m. and Friday at 1 p.m., the temperature was exactly 70. So this question is designed for older students, potentially in pre-calculus or calculus. But depending on how students approach this, they might use a graph. They might use some sort of linear model or an algebraic model in some regards, but this is going to tell you a lot about what the student is thinking about the concept, the intermediate value theorem. If you're also needing to assess different methods of proof, so potentially proof by contradiction, as one example, that will tell you where your students are in their use of those mathematical skills. I think it's important to remember that phenomena don't just provide a real-world example. They can drive an opportunity to use ideas and practices at the same time by providing students something to explain. So this idea that there's mathematical practices of proof, as well as concepts like the intermediate value theorem. I think it's also important that using new phenomenon helps students learn to transfer knowledge to novel situations. On our standardized tests, this is particularly important. We don't always know what the context for a question is going to be. We don't know if we're talking about Newton's laws. Are we talking about cars or people running or bicycles or kicking a soccer ball? So helping our students practice transfer by explaining a new phenomenon is going to pay dividends on those tests. And then the fourth thing is we want to provide students with feedback to support learning. So we want feedback to include both why the right answer is right and why the wrong answers are wrong. This is really important. If our students got the right answer for the wrong reason, we want an opportunity to correct that reasoning. Similarly, if our students are getting the wrong answer for common misconceptions, we can address that and do our best to help move science into more mathematically or scientifically accepted ways of thinking. And so right here, this is that same question from earlier. H is the correct answer because there are no additional forces acting on the ball. Students who put F and G, we want to help them think about that frictional force always opposes motion. So frictional force will only cause the ball to slow down. It won't be able to increase its speed or accelerate the ball, nor would the frictional force cause something to maintain its speed or velocity. And then J is wrong because inertia is the tendency of an object to continue moving with constant velocity. So if the inertia is of the ball, when we're talking about that, we're not going to be talking about the ball accelerating. It's going to need an external force to overcome its inertia in order to accelerate this, or move forward at an increased speed. And this is really interesting. If I were to give this, say, to a high school student, they may say something for J like, well, the total momentum of the box and ball system needs to stay the same. And if the ball or the box stops moving, then the ball must move faster. And I can tease out what's going on there, and help them also understand how they're missing something that likely when the ball and the box are initially moving, the ball is not moving relative to the box. So momentum is going to be conserved in this situation. And that's why, going back to the first and second things, we want to pull out students' thinking and make it visible about why they're choosing certain answers, because why they chose J can vary in a multitude of different ways. I also want to point out that peer review can be a powerful way to give feedback for students. So having students discuss why is J the wrong answer before I step in is a nice opportunity to help students, I should say, prepare for the test. And I think those are the 4 primary tips and approaches to reviewing for a test, especially at this point in the year. Again, I want to reiterate that our students are most benefited for the standardized test when we have high quality instruction occurring throughout the year. And it appears there are no questions. And so I just want to remind everyone the test is important, right? Our students have to pass the test, and we're not doing them a favor if we ignore that reality. But the test is not the reason we teach students. The standardized test is not the reason we have students learn math or science. And so we want to prepare them for the test in pedagogically effective ways with the more robust goals about making citizens and future doctors or mathematicians or lawyers who can use mathematics and science in their lives. So upcoming topics next week is when am I going to use this, which is focusing on engineering. In 2 weeks, I'm really excited for should we be afraid of AI in STEM education? And then throughout the month of April, I'll have a few more webinars. So I hope you join me. If you're interested in professional learning opportunities with argument-driven inquiry, please check out our websites. And if you have questions about any of this, you can email me, todd@argumentdriveninquiry.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Todd Hutner. And then you can follow Argument Driven Inquiry on our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages. So thank you all very much for joining me this afternoon, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week.